Tony, your book, Slugg, is called Slugg, A Boy's Life in the Age of Mass Incarceration. Thought it was a resonant moment. I want to stick on, throughout this morning, we're going to talk with a lot of folks about all of the aspects of us as Americans growing up around this system that we built. But a boy's life. For this conversation, I kind of want to stick in that moment right there. So, you started when where you came up originally as a young kid. You describe yourself as pampered. You were a young kid growing up. Talk a little bit about your early life, and then talk about the moment when everything changed.
Yeah, well, I grew up on Hanover Place, which is maybe 5 blocks from where we are right now. And at that time, my community, my street was the epicenter of the cocaine trade. My father was a major participant in that. Both of my parents grew up on Hanover Place. And so at the time of my birth, 1980, powder cocaine was a thing, and my street was the place that people in Washington came to get that. So with that, the money that my father made from that really provided a certain lifestyle for us, much different from what my parents experienced growing up, and much different from what the other people in my community experienced. So yeah, we did a lot of things that people with affluence do. Like, we traveled, we shopped, we enjoyed life, we spent a lot of quality time together. So yeah, and then in 1989, my father would go to prison and be charged for his role in a major conspiracy here in D.C. and receive life without the possibility of parole. And so life took a big 180 for me and my mother. So we went from being very affluent to being just like everybody else very quickly. And what also came along with that, obviously, I talked about the time we spent. My dad was a very hands-on father, so I lost that. And the stress and the pressure of that situation for my mother, it really crumbled her. And so essentially I lost my parents in the way that I had them prior to his incarceration. My mother would up until this day really battle with mental illness. And so for me as a 9-year-old, my innocence was stripped. My sense of security was stripped, and I had to grow up pretty fast. The other part of that was that their trial was major, and it was everywhere. And one of the things that I'll never forget is my dad was at D.C. jail, but it was claims that they were getting preferential treatment. So they went from D.C. jail to Quantico Marine Base, right? And so to visit someone at a Marine base, and Marines are there, right? M16s. But the other thing was that if there's no visiting hall, you have to go to the cell to actually visit. So to really, as a 9-year-old, to see your father on the other side of the bars in a very literal way was something that, is always etched in my memory. But those experiences and that trauma started, pretty much on April 15th, 1989.
That was such the journey that started at that point had to be, so complex. You were at once, I just imagine the range of emotions that you must have gone through. Because you write in your book, you said that you had, you saw the open air drug market on Hanover. You went, you hung out there, and you had a sense of what was happening a little bit. You would call out Olore. Talk about that.
So Olore was a code word for the police. And so you would see the adults or the teenagers saying that to give a cue that the police were coming. And when I was younger, the police didn't really come to our street like one car. Like, they would come in force. But obviously, the more heads up you can give people, the more people can, do what they need to do to avoid being arrested. And so as a child, you just felt like you wanted to contribute to that. You saw the police as they were bad. Right? You didn't understand that crime was going on. It was our norm. It was what happened in our community, and we wanted to protect the people that we love. We saw the police as people that came to take away the people that we cared about. And so, if any, from the age of 3, 4, if you felt like you wanted to play a part in protecting those that you cared about. And so you, as a young man, a young boy, I would definitely say Olore when I saw the police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were protecting your dad and his friends and those folks around you. At the same time, he was protecting you. And I want to ask you about how you, both as a kid and now as an adult, came to understand the choices that your father made. Because one of the things that you stress was that from the moment you were enlightened as to how your father made his business, from the moment you learned that, he was consistent on that he did not want that life for you. He did not want his life for you, and that the choices that he'd made in part to protect you from having to live that life and to have the consequence that befell him.
Yeah.
But that was complicated. That's a complicated message to give to a kid. How did you come to understand your father and his choices when he was telling you, I did this so you wouldn't have to? How legitimate did you come to find that?
Yeah, like, that's a great point, because, the understanding of what he did came, like, again, we growing up, we seeing people, doing things that we don't fully understand. But, I knew my dad didn't have a job, right? I did know that growing up. But as I became more aware of, him being a drug dealer, and when he went to prison, and his explanation of why he made those choices to try to make a better life for me, and him growing up, he didn't have a dad. Him growing up in an apartment on Hanover with 6 siblings, and not enough to eat, literally, right? And explaining that to me, why he started to make the choices to get involved in the lifestyle that was outside of our home. But after he went to prison, I was right back on that same block with all of those, and really in a worse time, honestly. Because once they went to prison, DC got even more violent. But the drugs, that culture was very present, right, in the 90s in DC.
So your dad is telling you, don't hang out with your friends.
Don't go out. Basically, he was saying, don't go outside. Like, he felt, I know a lot of times he felt that he was in prison. Obviously, he was very accountable that he broke the law. But in terms of these conspiracy and how their trial played out, was that most of the stuff that was mentioned in the trial had nothing to do with him. Yeah. And so he understood how guilty by association was a real thing. And so he wanted me, he never glorified what he did. He never justified what he did. He really felt like he was trying to do that to pivot somehow into another, some legal stuff, right? He wanted me, that's why education for him and my mother was so important for me. And he would always call and say, Slugg, watch who you're around. Slugg, don't get into nothing. I never wanted, he was very transparent also about what goes on in prison, right? And what happens there, why he would never, prison was for, in his words, this is not for any human being, right? So the last place he would want to see his son was there. And I appreciated, those conversations, though at the time it was like, well, who do I hang out with though? Because I didn't know anybody else. We didn't know anybody else, from the adults in my life, especially the males, to my peers. People were involved in the same lifestyle that he led. And so that became a struggle for me to navigate through that in my community. But I always had him as a motivator and an advisor to do the right thing. The older I got, though, it got more difficult to do that without any role models.
Yeah. He called you Slugg. Who was Slugg?
Yeah, so Slugg, when I was younger, like 2, 3 years old, they would kind of put like the boxing gloves on us, and and so I would, for the, in 4 years old, 5 years old, I would like to, fight, not fight, but like box. Sugar Ray Leonard was an idol of ours growing up. And so, the name Slugg came, it was Slugger at first. And then you know how the hood would do, and it turned into Slugg, know. So everybody who knows and loves me calls me Slugg. And that was why I wanted to, entitle the book that, right? Because that's who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ask you these questions, this great crowd that we've assembled here, filled with folks who do policy and write strong news stories and what have you, and they're probably wondering, why are we talking about this biography? I could read the book, which you should.
Sure, you really should.
But the work that you do now as an adult is in part with kids who are going through versions of what you went through as a kid. You mentor young folks who are surrounded by the system that we built.
Sure.
And how do you in talking with them, how do you carry some of the messages that you carry, knowing the complications of those messages? How do you tell a kid, so watch out for your social circle and the friends that you surround yourself
I
with?
mean, I try to be transparent. That's also what Slugg was about. I'm you, right? This is a map for you, trying to give you tools on how to be amongst your friends, but not necessarily make all the decisions that they make. Show them how they can be leaders, and for those of them that have leadership qualities already, established leadership qualities, how they can use that leadership for good, right? And give them resources so that they can find their gifts. As I did, find their purpose, and really try to instill their value in them. Because a lot of the decisions that our young people are making in the communities like the one I come from, they're not waking up saying, hey, I want to do something bad, right? It's about a lack of value and a lack of hope that I feel like we all play a role in establishing or giving to them, right? These communities that don't have access to certain opportunities, where incarceration is so normalized, where the role models, the people, I'll try to be for them what I didn't have. I see my situation in a lot of ways through my parents, my grandmother, even in their situation, that I got lucky. I knew that I was loved. I never was hungry, even though I grew up in a community where other people were, right? That meant something in a very literal way. That can make your decision making, that can make your morality or your moral compass be a bit different than somebody who eats every day, right?
Yeah.
And that's not an excuse. That's not a justification for some of the actions that people do, but it's the truth. Right, it's the real in terms of what informs decisions by young people. We're talking about children, and so for me, I've tried to build a certain level of supports. I've tried to inform policy. I've tried to enlighten folks to say that this conversation around incarceration or its impacts does not stop at inmates. Right? You have to think about who those people belong to or who belong to them, and what are we doing to stand in the gaps when those people are away? What are we doing to create a community that will allow those people, who 95% of them will return to us, allow them to do it the right way once they return, and if not for their sake, then for the sake of their children and ours. Because at the end of the day, I have two daughters. They share classroom with children that may have an incarcerated parent. I care about what happens to those children because they share space with my children, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That brings me to a question. I want to turn in a moment to ask to enable a question from the crowd. I have only one rule, which is no manifestos, just ask a question. Yeah. Straightforward, interrogative question. But, I happen to know, Tony, you and I are essentially the same age. There are places still, I believe, in this country where men who look like us in their 20s and 30s, 1 out of every 2 would either have been or still be in the carceral custody of the state. Mm-hmm. And that, in a conversation like this one, that's a pretty stark reality. Yeah. There's a zero-sumness to it. When you, for the point that you just made, that your kids are making a world with the kids of others who are in different circumstances from you, how does that fact inform your work?
Yeah. I mean, it really is the driving force in my work, right? In my work in helping men and women when they return from incarceration, which I've been doing the last 19 years. My whole adult life has been working in reentry, to pushing for school systems to identify children with incarcerated parents and provide certain supports for them.
Yeah. And when we were talking outside just now, you told me something about that statistic that was fascinating, about just that.
So, I mean, you think about it, you got in America, right? This is the whole universe of children in our country. 1 in 14 children have an incarcerated parent. 1 in 9 black children have an incarcerated parent, right? And so this is walking in our classrooms, and I think sometimes schools are more, I think they're reluctant because they don't want to, in their mind, open up Pandora's box. But I got a news flash. Pandora's box been open. it's open. You just choosing not to look at it. So I've been trying to work here in DC with DCPS. We created a social emotional services forum where parents could check off a box in terms of identifying traumas that their child might be going through, with the hopes of getting support around that trauma. Having an incarcerated parent is one of them. My thing is to get it on the enrollment form, though, not just here in DC, but across the country, so that we can get in front of that. And in my work with the book and going and doing these author talks in schools across the country, and seeing children be so transparent with me after reading Slugg. Like, I'm just like that. I'm going through that right now. And teachers are like, I had no idea. So this is also a support and a help for teachers, particularly teachers that may not necessarily come from a similar situation or a similar community. So it's important that we take this seriously. That we know that having an incarcerated parent may be the greatest destabilizer, that it's a cue that there are other additional traumas going on, that children with incarcerated parents are maybe 6 or 7 times more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system at some point. And far-reaching, we have to start thinking about an incarceration where if we grew up in the same community, that one of us will have some involvement in the criminal justice system. What does that mean for those around us? And the women in our community are right behind us. What does that mean for the community as a whole? What does that even mean for our ability to help, right? Everything is marginalized in that way if we're not strategic and intentional. We can't continue to wait. And we can't really piecemeal our interventions or piecemeal how we're going to tackle this American problem, because we have to address it from all ends. People say that they know the problem, but I'm not sure that they do, right? It's deeper than you can't really see this. You can't take sort of this, my man D. Watkins says, he talks about the drone point of view, right? You can't have a voice like this. Really has to be informed by people that not only have went through things but are currently going through it, that people that are on the ground. And in a lot of these forums that I have had the opportunity to participate in or be in the audience, many times I feel like we talk about people that work on the ground, and then we talk about the policymakers as if one trumps the other. The people that just work on the ground seem to be not necessarily their vantage point is like something we all get. But the policymakers are kind of the high end, right? Which I don't dispute that. But the people on the ground have, in my opinion, the best point of view, the point of view that we all have to go to them and get informed by them to really cultivate policy that's going to in turn really help the people that are going through these issues.
Yeah. Let us turn to a question over here from our very astute audience.
Hi, my name is Natasha Baker. I work for Open City Advocates. We're a nonprofit legal firm here in DC representing juveniles in the DC juvenile justice system. And I had a question about your work in schools and bringing in trauma-informed practices. What has been your experience working with the presence of police in schools? Because in our experience, and the research shows, that this is another iteration of mass incarceration driving more kids into the system. And so while you're pushing for trauma-informed practices, every school in DCPS has police in the schools too. So could you please speak to that aspect of your work?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with sort of the police being in schools. At the same time, we have to start the insecurity in general, right? We have to start to think about. I've also pushed to sort of get formerly incarcerated folks or people, community-based folks, more intertwined into our school systems. I feel like that you have organizations here that had like Cure the Streets and things of that nature, individuals that if they could be in the schools, it would be less likely the need for, security or law enforcement, people that can connect with these young people and inspire them and hold them accountable. I think because, and this is the other part, what happens is that children get desensitized to police and their presence when they're everywhere they are. And we have to think about that. Like I went to Gonzaga College High School. We had like 2 security guards that they secured the premises. They didn't secure us though. They didn't, we have to go through metal detectors and these type of things. So young people get desensitized to police officers. Police in my community were a constant presence. They were part of my everyday life. Interaction with police officers being searched by police officers. I'm talking as early as the age of 10 and 11 throughout my life. This stuff, so again, these are the other parts of this that we don't talk about enough. What does that do to a young person growing up, right? In terms of their value, how they feel about themselves, how they see themselves, and even what they can see themselves to be. And we have to do a better job of connecting the dots and seeing individuals that have been incarcerated or has been justice involved on any level, that they hold the key sometimes. They hold the answers to some of these problems.
That's a powerful question you just left us with. And fortunately, you've written a whole book that these folks can explore that question with further. Tony Lewis Jr., thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, everybody.